Welcome to Let's Talk About It. I'm Tamara,
And I'm Sheena.
and today we're going to be talking about lesbian culture. This is the start of a new season of Let's Talk About It, where we're going to be looking at one topic over 6 episodes.
So we've reformatted a little bit in light of my Ask a Butch thing, which seemed to work out really well. So we're trying to do a similar kind of format with Let's Talk About It.
Okay, so hopefully you guys like it, hopefully it works well, and if there are certain themes you'd like us to explore, let us know.
Yes. Okay, tomorrow. So let's do an intro. What are we talking about in terms of lesbian culture?
We're going to be exploring that over the new season with the 6 episodes, but I think today we'll start off with an introduction. When I think of lesbian culture, I think of the stereotypes of lesbians. So kind of angry, political, a little bit grungy. What comes to your mind?
Not that at all.
Okay, well, take it away.
Well, a lot of my lesbian culture references comes from lesbian fiction. So it tends to be women with jobs that matter or very creative jobs. So they'll either be kind of musicians or they'll be cops.
Okay, so women who are strong.
Yes.
Okay, well, that's a really good and positive aspect to lesbian culture. Now, why this topic came to mind is that there is a very strong gay culture, one that you can't miss, really. So if you think of things like Cher, Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, drag queens, gay bars, even Pride to an extent. And I know that, spans all of the LGBTQ spectrum. I don't know, for me it's still undeniably gay.
I think gay men tend to be the face of the LGBT community in many respects, and that's kind of unfortunate because it's a little bit erasing the rest of us.
Yes, I think it might be doing that, but back in the 70s to 90s, lesbians actually had quite a strong culture. So a lot of that culture came from a very political sort of space. So lesbians starting to claim their own space in the world, as well as the feminist movement. So even women who didn't identify as lesbians coming out and creating a much stronger feminine culture. And that, I think, became very entwined with lesbianism. When you think lesbians, you think political, or at least you did at one point in time. However, over the last decade or so, lesbian culture has sort of been eroding. It's disappearing. So you don't get the physical spaces anymore, such as bookstores, festivals, even things like magazines are disappearing. So this is creating a space where lesbian culture has become pretty much nothing.
Do you think this is as the feminist movement, which is so intertwined with the lesbian space, as the feminist movement kind of evolves, because we have a lot more rights than we did then. We are more equal than we were then. Do you think it has to do with that?
Possibly. With any sort of wave, there's always a backlash to that wave. So with feminism, there was this very strong culture of being very anti anything feminine. So you started having women wearing trousers, women joining careers that were much more male focused, women trying to show that they weren't delicate, that they could be as good as any man, right? But then sort of like in the 80s, that completely shifted to where feminism again was much softer, into the 90s as well. So it was much softer. It was about being a career woman, sure, but also having the family. So a more softer approach. And I think as lesbians have gotten more rights, as women as a whole have gotten more rights, it's eroded some of that identity.
Tom Peters wrote a book about how marketers should be targeting women because women have the spending power. They did some research and they discovered that women spend way more than men on average, and in heterosexual households, it tends to be the women that spend even if the men earn the money. So the women are the ones that are going out shopping and making the buying decisions, even the big ones. He did this because marketing does not tend to focus on women generally, and even less of that focuses on lesbians. So you don't get the spaces that are promoting purchasing by lesbians. You don't get lesbian bars anymore. You don't get lesbian bookstores anymore. You don't get lesbian specific marketing, if you like.
This can also be seen recently with the After Ellen sort of semi-closing down. What was it, a couple of years ago now? The reason that was given by the mother company at that point was that it was no longer profitable, and this despite the company actually showing growth. And this comes back to the point of advertisers do not see lesbian as women, or they just don't even consider lesbians as a market, despite lesbians needing every single product any other woman would need. We would need period products, we'd need clothing, toiletries, cosmetics, all of those things, but we aren't considered. I mean, there's Subaru, but besides them, who else is targeting lesbians?
We are seeing an increase in lesbian advertising with the LGBT friendly brands, but then it tends to be an inclusive LGBT thing as opposed to a lesbian specific thing. Now, this is such a weird and delicate kind of space to be in, because you don't want to say, hey, don't advertise to the rest of the spectrum. That's not what we're talking about here. But we are talking about the buying power of women specifically, and the need to look at lesbians as a potential market and not just the stepchildren of
the consumer market.
Yeah.
The fact is, in America alone, there's 5.1 million LGBT women. That is a huge market, and it shouldn't be grouped in with anything that includes male-driven products. Because the thing is, gay sites or gay male sites don't have the same problem. They're being marketed by the Gillette of this world and those kinds of companies, but the same thing isn't happening for lesbian or bisexual women.
Why do you suppose this is?
Because lesbians are just not thought of. Neither are bisexual women, come to that matter. Despite our needs being there, they expect us to, I suppose, see those adverts in other media. So in your more traditional female magazines like Cosmopolitan, Glamour, and so on TV advertising, billboards.
5.1 million women in the US alone is a big market. It's a market worth looking into. What is going on? This just seems like we're missing the point somewhere along the line. Like, marketing people are missing the point.
Well, something has just occurred to me, and I wonder if the pornification of lesbianism is partly to blame for this, because especially with online advertising, the term lesbian is usually marked as not safe for work or one of these terminologies that are restricted by Google advertising, Facebook advertising, and so on. So maybe something as simple as that blocks the growth of that.
You know, I wouldn't actually be surprised, just because I know that I struggle because my URL gets blocked randomly because it has the word lesbian in it. And Google comes down hard on me if I have even just a page with like a erotic novel on it, even though we have no erotic scenes whatsoever. It assumes I'm some sort of pornographic site. It's very frustrating. So how do we get beyond this as lesbian women? How do we take away the pornographic stereotype?
I think it begins with not lesbians, honestly. It begins with media as a whole going, this is 2018 and we no longer view these things as, I don't know, perverted or bad. Because why should lesbian as a term be seen as something negative? And it's only seen as something negative because it's been co-opted by the porn industry. So while as lesbians we can do all we want to try to take away that stereotype, it's going to take much more than just us to do it. It needs people who are in power in places of media to help. And this brings to mind another topic that links in with lesbian culture, and that's the disappearing L. People are moving away from the term lesbian because they're trying to own it, but they're owning it through using words like gay and queer. And because I suppose terms like lesbian are seen as very sex-focused, but again, it removes lesbian from top of mind.
Here's my thoughts on this then. What we need to do is we need to support lesbian media. We need to go out there and buy the lesbian magazines and listen to the lesbian podcasts and share the lesbian content and claim the word lesbian. Put it in your profile on Twitter if you're okay with that. Put it in your profile on Facebook. Join lesbian groups and let's reclaim lesbian spaces. Go to your local lesbian bookstore if it still exists. Spend your money there. Spend your money in lesbian spaces, because what we're going to do then is we're going to turn around and show the advertisers that actually we do have buying power, and yes, we are choosing where we spend our money.
That's a great point. You really should be spending your money where it counts. Vote with your dollar, vote with your rand, vote with your pound, and whatever other currency that there is. And make sure that those lesbian spaces continue to grow. In the world that we live in, where the internet makes it so easy to meet people like ourselves, remember that the internet is also creating a space that removes the need for the physical spaces, because it's much easier to find other lesbians through dating profiles, through forums, through websites. So make an effort to actually go out into the real world and take part in lesbian spaces, gay spaces, queer spaces.
And support lesbian-owned businesses, not just businesses that target lesbian people, lesbian-owned businesses, because there's a big difference for me between a online magazine that is owned and run by women than one that's owned and run by heterosexual guys who couldn't care less about our spaces. I'm all for allies, but not all of these places are allies. They're just trying to make a buck off of us, if that makes sense. So let's use our spaces wisely and support online lesbian businesses and or any lesbian businesses. And you can actually find lesbian businesses by looking up the lesbian business community, I think it's called. It's a website directory of lesbian businesses, lesbian-owned businesses all over the world, websites, and a lot in the States. And I think, unfortunately, the lesbian culture is evolving and not necessarily in a healthy way. So let's reclaim it.
Yes. So go out and do your best. We know that it's not always possible to only support lesbian companies, but where you can, do.
Absolutely. I think that's all for this week. I'm Sheena.
And I'm Tamara, and thank you for listening.
You can support this show by becoming a patron of the Lesbian Talk Show. Link is in the show notes, or you can find us on patreon.com/the Lesbian Talk Show.
Your money goes towards keeping this show going, as well as the rest of the channel.
Plus, you get exclusive content. This month, I have interviewed Radie Magden and asked her 5 very personal questions that she answers, and only patrons get that content.
Don't forget to share this podcast with your friends.
Join us on Facebook at the Lesbian Talk Show chat group. You can also come follow us on Twitter and come sign up for our email where we send you a weekly roundup of all the podcasts so that you don't miss any. Bye-bye.
Bye.